Nutty Putty Cave in Utah had earned a reputation among spelunkers as both thrilling and treacherous. The narrow passages lined with soft clay attracted experienced cavers seeking technical challenges. But the cave's history was already marked by numerous rescues and close calls. Recognizing the danger, authorities had closed the cave system completely in 2004 after too many emergency situations stretched rescue resources beyond their limits. The decision to reopen the cave just 6 months before November 2009 proved to be a catastrophic mistake. New management implemented an online reservation system designed to control access and prevent overcrowding. The theory was sound. Limiting the number of people entering simultaneously would reduce risk and make the cave safer for everyone. The reality was that no reservation system could address the fundamental problem. The cave itself was a death trap waiting for the right combination of circumstances. On Thanksgiving weekend of 2009, those circumstances aligned perfectly. A 26-year-old medical student named John Edward Jones arrived with his brother and 9 other family members for what should have been a routine caving expedition. Jones was experienced enough to navigate the cave's challenges. But experience means nothing when you make the wrong turn at the wrong moment. Deep inside the cave system, Jones decided to find a passage known as the birth canal, a notoriously tight squeeze that experienced cavers used to test their skills. What happened next demonstrates how quickly adventure becomes tragedy underground. Jones wriggled headfirst into what he believed was the birth canal, but the passage he entered was actually an unmapped dead end, measuring just 18 inches by 10 inches. The mistake was understandable in the cave's confusing layout, but the consequences were immediate and irreversible. When Jones attempted to back out of the narrow fissure, he discovered the horrifying reality of human anatomy in confined spaces. The mechanics of his entrapment were brutally simple. When he exhaled to make himself smaller for the retreat, his chest cavity contracted. When he inhaled, his chest expanded, wedging him more tightly into the rock. Each breath cycle locked him deeper into position like a human ratchet mechanism. Within minutes, Jones found himself trapped upside down at a 70-degree angle, 150 feet below ground level, in a space barely wider than his body. The rescue operation that followed would involve over 100 people working desperately for 28 hours. The technical challenges were unprecedented. The narrow passage made it impossible to get equipment close to Jones. The soft clay walls couldn't support conventional anchoring systems. Most critically, his inverted position was slowly killing him. The human body isn't designed to function upside down for extended periods. Blood pools in the head while the heart struggles to pump against gravity, creating mounting pressure that organs can't withstand indefinitely. Rescuers managed to establish communication with Jones and began the complex process of extraction. They drilled anchors into the cave walls and rigged an elaborate pulley system designed to pull him back up through the passage. The physics were challenging, but not impossible. For a brief moment, the system worked. Jones was pulled several feet higher, creating desperate hope that the rescue might succeed. Then, the soft clay that gave the cave its name became the instrument of final tragedy. The anchor point drilled into the unstable cave wall ripped free under the massive forces involved in the extraction attempt. The equipment failure sent Jones plummeting back into the crevice even deeper than before, while striking a rescuer with the failed hardware. The setback was devastating both physically and psychologically. Jones was now wedged more tightly than ever, and the rescue team had exhausted their best option for extraction. As the hours passed, Jones's condition deteriorated rapidly. The inverted position was causing his organs to fill with fluid, while his cardiovascular system struggled with the impossible demands of pumping blood uphill. Despite heroic efforts from rescuers who risked their own lives in the unstable cave system, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead after 28 hours of entrapment. The cave that had already claimed too many rescue resources had finally claimed a life. The decision that followed was unprecedented, but inevitable. The cave was too dangerous to attempt body recovery. The same conditions that had made rescue impossible made retrieval equally hazardous. Rather than risk more lives trying to recover Jones's remains, authorities made the extraordinary choice to seal the cave permanently. Today, Nutty Putty Cave is filled with concrete, serving as both tomb and monument to the dangers of underground exploration. The broader consequences extended far beyond one sealed cave. The tragedy sparked comprehensive reviews of adventure tourism safety protocols across the country. Cave systems nationwide implemented stricter access controls, enhanced safety requirements, and more rigorous rescue preparations. The incident became a case study in how quickly recreational activities can turn deadly when natural hazards meet human limitations. But the most significant impact was philosophical. The death of John Edward Jones forced a fundamental reckoning with acceptable risk in adventure tourism. One person's tragic mistake in navigation had demonstrated that some environments are simply too dangerous for public access, regardless of experience level or safety precautions. The result was a permanent restriction that affects every future generation of cavers who might have explored those passages safely. The concrete ceiling Nutty Putty Cave represents more than just one man's final resting place. It's a physical manifestation of how individual tragedy creates collective restriction. The cave system that had provided adventure and challenge for thousands of spelunkers over decades was eliminated forever because one wrong turn proved that the risk was unacceptable. Every caver who will never experience those passages lives with the consequences of Jones's fatal navigation error. This pattern of individual mistake leading to universal restriction would repeat itself in contexts far removed from underground exploration, but the principle remains constant. When someone demonstrates that a particular freedom or activity can have catastrophic consequences, that freedom disappears for everyone. The tragedy isn't just personal, it's civilizational, creating a world slightly more constrained and slightly less adventurous. Because one person couldn't turn around in time. The second case takes us from underground death traps to the sterile corridors of airport security, where one man's bungled terrorism attempt fundamentally changed how billions of people travel. Before December 2001, flying was a remarkably casual experience. Passengers kept their shoes on, carried full-size bottles of liquids, and often walked family members directly to departure gates. Airport security existed, but it operated with the assumption that most people weren't trying to blow up airplanes. That assumption died along with the casual nature of air travel, thanks to Richard Reed, a man whose spectacular incompetence at terrorism created restrictions that persist more than 2 decades later. Reed wasn't a criminal mastermind operating in isolation. He was a petty criminal who had found extremist ideology during a prison sentence, then became the clumsy instrument of a sophisticated terrorist cell based in Paris. His handlers had provided him with shoes packed with TATP, a volatile homemade explosive known for its instability and devastating potential. The plan was straightforward: board a transatlantic flight and detonate the device during flight, killing everyone aboard and terrorizing the flying public. What actually happened reveals how individual incompetence can have consequences far beyond the immediate failure. Reed's first attempt to board American Airlines Flight 63 from Paris to Miami on December 22, 2001 was a masterclass in suspicious behavior. He arrived at Charles de Gaulle Airport looking disheveled, carrying no checked luggage, and paying for his ticket in cash. These red flags were so obvious that security personnel immediately flagged him for additional screening. During hours of questioning, Reed's nervous behavior and inconsistent answers raised so many concerns that airline officials refused to allow him to board. He was told to return the following day if he still wanted to travel. Most rational people would have interpreted this rejection as a clear warning to abandon their mission. Reed was not most rational people. He returned the next day wearing the exact same explosive-laden shoes and attempted to board the same flight. This time, his appearance was slightly improved, and he managed to pass through security screening. The shoes that had been packed with explosives were now not just dangerous, but compromised by his own nervous sweating during the previous day's interrogation. The moisture had degraded the explosive material, making it less reliable, but no less deadly if successfully detonated. During the flight, Reed's attempt to ignite his shoe bomb created the kind of chaos that defines nightmares for airline security. Passengers noticed the smell of smoke and sulfur as Reed hunched over his shoe, attempting to light a fuse connected to the explosive device. His first attempt failed because the damp explosives wouldn't ignite properly. When he tried again, flight attendant Hermes Moutardier spotted him and immediately intervened, grabbing his arm to prevent him from completing the detonation sequence. Reed's response was to bite Moutardier's hand, but his violent resistance only drew more attention from passengers and crew. Other travelers quickly joined the struggle, with a particularly large passenger helping to physically restrain Reed using belts and headphone cords. 2 doctors aboard the flight administered sedatives from the plane's medical kit, ensuring that Reed couldn't make another attempt at detonation. The bomb itself was recovered intact, providing investigators with a forensic treasure trove that revealed the sophisticated nature of the plot despite Reed's bumbling execution. The forensic analysis of the shoe bomb exposed the disturbing reality behind Reed's failed mission. The device contained palm prints and hair samples that didn't belong to Reed, indicating that the bomb had been constructed by an unknown expert who remained at large. The explosive material was professionally prepared and would have been devastating if successfully detonated. Reed's personal incompetence had prevented a catastrophe, but the near miss demonstrated that terrorist organizations were actively targeting commercial aviation with sophisticated weapons disguised as everyday items. The response from aviation security authorities was swift and comprehensive. The what-if scenario was too terrifying to ignore. If Reed had successfully concealed and detonated his shoe bomb, hundreds of people would have died and public confidence in air travel would have collapsed. The fact that his failure was due to moisture damage and personal incompetence rather than security effectiveness made the incident even more alarming. A more competent terrorist with better timing could have succeeded where Reed had failed. Within months of Reed's arrest, the Transportation Security Administration implemented mandatory shoe removal at security checkpoints across the United States. The policy quickly spread to airports worldwide as aviation authorities recognized that shoes could effectively conceal explosive devices. What began as an American response to one failed terrorist became a global standard that affects every commercial flight passenger on Earth. The broader implications of Reed's bungled attack extended far beyond footwear removal. His case demonstrated that terrorist organizations were adapting their methods to exploit perceived vulnerabilities in aviation security. The sophistication of the bomb construction, combined with Reed's lack of expertise in using it, suggested that terrorist cells were recruiting expendable operatives to carry out attacks designed by more skilled bomb makers. This realization prompted comprehensive reviews of airport security protocols and passenger screening procedures. The permanence of the shoe removal requirement reveals how security policies, once implemented, become virtually impossible to reverse. More than 20 years after Reed's failed attack, billions of passengers continue to remove their shoes at security checkpoints, despite technological advances that could potentially detect explosives without requiring footwear removal. The bureaucratic momentum of security theatre has made the restriction self-perpetuating, regardless of its actual effectiveness in preventing terrorism. The psychological impact of Reed's attack may be even more significant than the physical security measures it inspired. His failed bombing demonstrated that terrorism doesn't require success to achieve its goals. The mere attempt to use everyday items as weapons was sufficient to transform those items into sources of suspicion and restriction. Every passenger who has stood in their socks at airport security has experienced the lasting power of Reed's incompetent terrorism to reshape human behavior decades after the fact. Reed's legacy extends beyond aviation into the broader relationship between individual actions and collective consequences. His single failed attack created a permanent change in how billions of people experience travel, proving that one person's criminal incompetence can have effects that persist far longer than any prison sentence. The restrictions he inadvertently created will likely outlast everyone who remembers why they were implemented, becoming simply part of the accepted reality of modern travel. The third transformation takes us from airport security to television game shows, where one man's obsessive dedication to pattern recognition permanently altered how an iconic American program operates. For 36 years, The Price is Right had maintained its reputation as wholesome family entertainment, where ordinary people could win extraordinary prizes through luck and intuition. The show's format seemed immune to systematic exploitation because it relied on contestants' general knowledge of consumer prices rather than specialized skills or inside information. That assumption proved catastrophically wrong on December 16, 2008, when mathematical precision collided with game show naivety in front of a national television audience. The contestant who would break The Price is Right wasn't trying to cheat the system. Terry Neese was a 60-year-old weatherman from Wisconsin who had been selected from the studio audience through the show's normal process. He seemed like the perfect contestant, enthusiastic, personable, and completely ordinary in his approach to the game. What the producers didn't realize was that Neese had received coaching from someone who had spent decades turning casual game show viewing into obsessive data collection. The real architect of the show's downfall was sitting in the studio audience, carefully tracking every prize and price revealed during the taping. Theodore Slauson had transformed Price is Right fandom into something approaching scientific research, maintaining detailed databases of every item featured on the show and their corresponding retail prices. His motivation wasn't financial gain, but intellectual satisfaction derived from solving what he viewed as a fascinating pattern recognition puzzle. Slauson's methodology revealed the show's fundamental vulnerability. The producers had become lazy in their prize selection, recycling the same items at identical prices across multiple episodes and seasons. What seemed like an impossibly vast universe of consumer products was actually a relatively small rotation of familiar prizes with predictable valuations. For someone with Slauson's dedication to data collection, the show's pricing patterns were as predictable as weather forecasts. The systematic nature of Slauson's research extended beyond casual observation to comprehensive documentation. He recorded episodes, catalogued prizes, tracked price variations, and identified the recurring items that formed the backbone of the show's prize rotation. His database revealed that many products appeared so frequently at identical prices that their values could be memorized rather than estimated. The show that claimed to test contestants' knowledge of retail prices had actually become a test of memory for viewers obsessive enough to track the patterns. When Neese advanced through the preliminary rounds with Slauson's guidance, their collaboration demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of systematic preparation against intuitive gameplay. Slauson would signal the correct prices for showcase items, allowing Neese to bid with mathematical precision rather than educated guesswork. The other contestants were playing a game of estimation and luck, while Neese was operating with near-perfect information about actual retail prices. The climax came during the showcase showdown, where Neese faced a prize package consisting of a karaoke machine, pool table, and 16-foot camper. In the show's history, no contestant had ever achieved a perfect bid on the showcase, coming within $100 of the actual retail price without going over. The mathematical precision required seemed impossible, given the complexity of estimating multiple items simultaneously. Neese calmly submitted his bid of $23,743, a number so specific that it could only result from exact knowledge rather than estimation. When host Drew Carey revealed that the actual retail price was exactly $23,743, the studio audience erupted in celebration. while the production staff experienced something closer to panic. Carey's smile vanished as he realized he was witnessing either the most extraordinary coincidence in game show history or evidence of systematic fraud. The taping was immediately halted while producers investigated how such perfect accuracy could be achieved. The investigation revealed that while no rules had been technically violated, the show's entire premise had been systematically undermined. Nice hadn't cheated in any traditional sense. He had simply received information that was publicly available to anyone dedicated enough to collect and analyze it. Slauson's signals from the audience were elaborate, but not illegal. The problem wasn't rule violation, but the exposure of fundamental flaws in the show's design and execution. The aftermath of Kneiss's perfect bid forced the Price is Right to confront the reality that their casual approach to prize selection had made their show vulnerable to systematic exploitation. The producers' response was comprehensive and permanent, retiring countless prizes that had appeared too frequently, diversifying their vendor relationships, and implementing randomization systems designed to prevent pattern recognition. The show that had operated successfully for decades with minimal security suddenly required sophisticated anti-exploitation measures. The deeper implications of Nice's perfect showcase bid revealed how individual obsession could permanently transform established institutions. Slauson's decade-long project of data collection had exposed vulnerabilities that the show's creators never anticipated when they designed the format in the 1970s. The assumption that consumer pricing knowledge would remain within reasonable bounds for ordinary contestants had been shattered by someone who treated the game show as a mathematical system to be solved rather than entertainment to be enjoyed. The security measures implemented after Nice's appearance transformed The Price is Right from a casual production into something resembling a casino operation. Producers began tracking which items appeared too frequently, rotating prizes on complex schedules, and adding random price adjustments to prevent memorization. The spontaneous nature that had defined the show for decades gave way to calculated unpredictability designed to thwart future Slausons who might dedicate years to cracking the system. But the changes extended beyond prize selection into the fundamental relationship between the show and its audience. The trust that had existed between producers and viewers was permanently altered by the recognition that some fans weren't content to simply watch and enjoy. They were studying, analyzing, and preparing to exploit any systematic weakness they could identify. The innocent days when contestants succeeded through luck and general knowledge were replaced by an arms race between production security and viewer dedication. The fourth case demonstrates how corporate generosity can be weaponized by individuals who mistake policies for opportunities. L.L.Bean had built its reputation over more than a century on an ironclad promise that seemed too good to be true and somehow managed to remain genuine for 106 years. The company's 100% satisfaction guarantee, instituted by founder Leon Wood Bean in 1912, allowed customers to return any item at any time for any reason without question or time limit. This policy wasn't just marketing rhetoric, but a fundamental business philosophy that treated customer satisfaction as more important than short-term profits. Customers could return boots that had lasted 10 years before wearing out, receive full refunds for jackets that ripped after decades of use, or exchange items that no longer fit after lifestyle changes. The guarantee built extraordinary customer loyalty and established L.L.Bean as one of the most trusted brands in American retail. The system worked because it was based on mutual respect and good faith. Customers appreciated the security of knowing their purchases were protected by unconditional warranty coverage, while the company benefited from reduced returns because people felt confident about their buying decisions. The occasional abuse of the policy was considered an acceptable cost of maintaining customer trust and satisfaction. This delicate balance persisted for over a century until systematic exploitation transformed occasional abuse into organized fraud. The emergence of the thrift store flipper represented a new category of customer that the original guarantee had never anticipated. These weren't dissatisfied purchasers seeking resolution for defective products, but entrepreneurs who had discovered that L.L.Bean's guarantee could be converted into a profit-generating system. They would scour yard sales, thrift stores, and estate sales looking for old L.L.Bean items regardless of condition, purchase them for pennies on the dollar, then return them to the company for full retail price refunds. The sophistication of this exploitation revealed how thoroughly some individuals had studied the guarantee's language and implementation. They understood that the policy contained no time limits, required no proof of original purchase, and placed no restrictions on the condition of returned items. Armed with this knowledge, they could transform any L.L.Bean product found in the secondary market into immediate cash by simply walking into a store and claiming dissatisfaction. The scale of this abuse grew exponentially as word spread through online communities dedicated to retail arbitrage and profit maximization schemes. What began as isolated incidents of opportunistic returns evolved into organized operations, where individuals would arrive at stores with garbage bags full of decades-old, heavily worn items they had never purchased themselves. The sight of customers demanding cash refunds for obviously abused products they hadn't bought became routine at L.L.Bean locations across the country. The financial impact was devastating and unsustainable. The company estimated that guarantee abuse was costing them $250 million annually by 2018, a figure that represented not just lost revenue, but the systematic exploitation of a policy designed to benefit legitimate customers. The cost wasn't just monetary, but reputational, as honest customers witnessed the spectacle of obvious fraud being accommodated under the company's generous return policy. The psychological effect on employees was equally damaging. Store associates found themselves in the impossible position of having to honor returns they knew were fraudulent, while watching the company's generosity be systematically abused by people who had no genuine relationship with the brand. The policy that had once been a source of pride for employees became a daily reminder of how individual greed could corrupt institutional goodwill. L.L.Bean faced an impossible choice that no company should have to make. They could continue absorbing the massive losses from systematic abuse, passing the cost on to honest customers through higher prices, or they could abandon the policy that had defined their brand for over a century. The decision to modify the guarantee in 2018 represented a corporate admission that human nature had evolved beyond what their founding principles could accommodate. The new policy implemented a 1-year time limit for returns and required proof of purchase, transforming the unlimited guarantee into something resembling standard retail practice. The change eliminated the systematic abuse, but also eliminated the trust and confidence that had distinguished L.L.Bean from competitors for generations. Customers who had never abused the policy found themselves subject to restrictions created by people who had treated corporate generosity as a business opportunity. The broader implications extended beyond one company's return policy into fundamental questions about trust in commercial relationships. The L.L.Bean guarantee had represented a rare example of institutional faith in customer honesty, a business model that assumed people would act in good faith even when presented with opportunities for exploitation. The systematic abuse that destroyed this policy revealed how quickly trust disappears when it encounters organized dishonesty. The fifth transformation takes us from retail fraud to environmental disaster, where a single day's spectacle created ecological catastrophe that continues to affect an entire ecosystem decades later. The city of Cleveland in 1986 was eager to create something memorable, a fundraising event that would break world records while supporting the United Way's charitable mission. The concept seemed harmless enough. Release 1.5 million balloons simultaneously to create a spectacular visual display, while raising money for worthy causes. Balloonfest '86 required months of preparation and the coordination of hundreds of volunteers who spent countless hours inflating balloons and preparing the massive net system that would contain them until the moment of release. The scale was unprecedented, covering an entire city block in Cleveland's public square with a colorful sea of latex balloons waiting to transform the sky into a psychedelic celebration of charitable giving and civic pride. The organizers had focused their attention on logistics and spectacle while paying insufficient attention to meteorological conditions. The September 27th release date had been chosen for symbolic reasons rather than weather considerations, and the approaching cold front that would prove catastrophic was either ignored or underestimated by event planners who prioritized visual impact over atmospheric science. When the net was released at precisely 1:50 in the afternoon, the initial result was everything the organizers had hoped for. The sky filled with a surging cloud of color as 1.5 million balloons rose into the air, creating a breathtaking display that delighted the massive crowd gathered to witness the spectacle. For approximately 30 seconds, Balloonfest '86 achieved its goal of creating something truly memorable and visually stunning. Then physics and meteorology intervened in ways that transformed celebration into catastrophe. The approaching cold front created atmospheric conditions that prevented the balloons from dispersing as planned. Instead of rising high into the atmosphere and scattering across a wide area, the balloons encountered the wall of cold, wet air and began to descend back toward Earth in a concentrated mass that covered the surrounding region. The environmental impact was immediate and comprehensive. Cleveland's streets became impassable as millions of balloons clogged roadways and caused hundreds of traffic accidents. The nearby airport was forced to shut down runways as balloons interfered with aircraft operations. But the most severe consequences occurred when the balloon mass descended onto Lake Erie, creating a solid covering that made water rescue operations impossible. The timing of this environmental disaster coincided tragically with an ongoing search and rescue operation. 2 fishermen, Raymond Broderick and Bernard Sulzer, had been reported missing on Lake Erie just hours before the balloon release. Coast Guard helicopters were actively searching for the men when the lake surface became completely obscured by millions of floating balloons that made it impossible to distinguish between latex debris and human heads in the water. The search operation had to be abandoned due to the balloon coverage, and the men's bodies were recovered 2 days later when the balloons had finally dispersed enough to allow effective water search operations. The families filed a $3.2 million lawsuit against the United Way, arguing that the balloon release had directly prevented the rescue of their loved ones by making aerial search impossible during the critical hours when the men might still have been saved. The ecological consequences extended far beyond the immediate search and rescue complications. The massive quantity of latex debris created environmental pollution that affected wildlife throughout the region for months after the event. Birds and marine animals ingested balloon fragments, while the non-biodegradable materials contaminated water sources and natural habitats across a wide area surrounding Cleveland and Lake Erie. The financial outcome was equally disastrous for the charitable organization that had hoped to raise money through the spectacular event. Legal settlements, cleanup costs, and the negative publicity associated with the deaths and environmental damage transformed what was intended to be a profitable fundraiser into a massive financial loss that undermined rather than supported the United Way's charitable mission. The regulatory response was swift and comprehensive. Cities and states across the country began implementing bans on mass balloon releases, recognizing that the environmental and safety risks far outweighed any aesthetic or symbolic benefits. The legislation that emerged from Cleveland's disaster eliminated a form of celebration that had been common at sporting events, festivals, and commemorative occasions for decades. The scientific community used the Cleveland incident as a case study in unintended consequences and environmental impact assessment. The event demonstrated how activities that seem harmless in isolation can become catastrophic when scaled up without adequate consideration of systemic effects. The atmospheric conditions that made the balloon release dangerous were predictable and should have been incorporated into planning decisions. The psychological impact on Cleveland residents was profound and lasting. The city that had hoped to create a memorable celebration instead became associated with environmental disaster and preventable deaths. The spectacle that was supposed to generate positive publicity and community pride became a symbol of poor planning and institutional failure that overshadowed any charitable goals the event might have achieved. The transformation from celebration to catastrophe revealed how quickly good intentions can produce terrible outcomes when individual decisions ignore scientific reality and environmental responsibility. The organizers who planned Balloonfest '86 weren't malicious, but were catastrophically naive about the consequences of their actions. Their failure to consider weather conditions and environmental impact created restrictions that affect celebration planning worldwide decades after their balloons fell back to Earth. The sixth case transports us from environmental disasters to the intersection of social media and national security, where one person's quest for internet fame exposed vulnerabilities that forced an entire industry to confront its most dangerous weaknesses. Nuclear power plants represent the pinnacle of industrial security, facilities where even minor breaches can trigger international incidents and regulatory earthquakes. These installations operate under security protocols developed over decades, with multiple layers of protection designed to prevent unauthorized access to areas where radiological disasters could unfold. Marcus Thompson had built a modest following on YouTube by exploring abandoned buildings and documenting urban decay. His channel attracted viewers who enjoyed vicarious adventures through forgotten places, but abandoned structures weren't generating the subscriber growth that Thompson craved. He decided to escalate his content by targeting an active nuclear facility, specifically the Davis-Besse nuclear power plant in Ohio, apparently believing that the dramatic footage would justify whatever consequences might follow. The security breach that Thompson accomplished reveals how sophisticated perimeter defenses can be undermined by the most basic human failures. He didn't employ advanced surveillance equipment, computer hacking, or elaborate disguises. Instead, he simply walked through a gap in the facility's perimeter fence that maintenance crews had left unrepaired. This opening, which should have been temporary and closely monitored, became Thompson's entry point into one of the most secure industrial facilities in the United States. For 5 hours, Thompson wandered freely through the owner-controlled area of the nuclear facility, filming everything he encountered for his YouTube audience. The footage he captured showed sensitive security installations, equipment layouts, and operational details that could potentially be valuable to anyone planning a more serious attack on the facility. His camera documented not just the areas he accessed, but also the complete absence of security response to his presence. The security systems that should have detected Thompson's intrusion were either malfunctioning or unmanned. Multiple silent alarms were triggered by his movement through restricted areas, but nobody responded to investigate the breaches. The facility's security apparatus had become so routine and complacent that actual unauthorized access went unnoticed for hours, demonstrating a systematic failure that extended far beyond Thompson's individual trespass. Thompson's adventure ended only when he decided to leave the facility and happened to encounter a security officer who spotted him exiting through the same fence gap he had used to enter. Had he chosen to remain hidden within the facility's boundaries, he might have continued his unauthorized exploration indefinitely, given the complete lack of security response to his extended presence in restricted areas. When plant leadership and Nuclear Regulatory Commission officials reviewed Thompson's footage, their horror wasn't just about the security breach itself, but about what the footage revealed to the entire world. Thompson had created a detailed video guide to the facility's security weaknesses, complete with entry points, patrol patterns, and equipment locations. His YouTube channel had inadvertently become an intelligence resource for anyone interested in attacking American nuclear infrastructure. The regulatory response was immediate and comprehensive. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission launched a special inspection of the Davis-Besse facility, resulting in a complete overhaul of security procedures that cost millions of dollars and took months to implement. But the consequences extended far beyond one compromised facility to encompass the entire American nuclear power industry. Thompson's breach had demonstrated that nuclear security was built on assumptions about perimeter integrity that were fundamentally flawed. If one facility could be penetrated so easily by someone with no specialized training or equipment, every nuclear installation in the country was potentially vulnerable to similar intrusions. The NRC issued a nationwide directive requiring all nuclear facilities to reassess their security perimeters, response protocols, and monitoring systems. The financial impact rippled through the nuclear industry as facilities that had operated for decades with stable security budgets suddenly faced mandatory upgrades, costing hundreds of millions of dollars collectively. Security contractors experienced unprecedented demand for perimeter monitoring systems, while nuclear operators struggled to implement enhanced protocols without disrupting power generation operations. The psychological effect on nuclear security personnel was equally significant. The revelation that someone could wander freely through a restricted area for hours while triggering multiple alarms exposed systematic failures in training, equipment maintenance, and operational procedures. Security teams that had considered their facilities impenetrable were forced to confront the reality that their defenses had been compromised by someone seeking YouTube views rather than radiological materials. The broader implications extended into national security policy and international nuclear safeguards. If American nuclear facilities could be breached so easily by casual trespassers, the entire framework of nuclear security assurances was called into question. Allied nations expressed concerns about security standards at American installations, while domestic critics demanded investigations into regulatory oversight of nuclear security protocols. These 10 cases reveal a disturbing truth about human civilization. We don't live in the world we could have, but in the world that certain individuals have forced us to accept. Every restriction we've examined exists because someone, somewhere, made a choice so catastrophically wrong that authorities had no alternative but to eliminate that possibility forever. The person who caused each crisis moved on with their life. The rest of humanity inherited their consequences permanently, from sealed caves to airport security lines, from modified game shows to abandoned return policies. These restrictions represent the accumulated weight of individual failure becoming collective burden. The most tragic aspect isn't that these incidents happened, but that they were entirely preventable. Each disaster resulted from someone ignoring obvious warnings, exploiting obvious loopholes, or pursuing personal gratification without considering broader consequences. The pattern repeats itself across every domain of human activity because the fundamental dynamic never changes. Trust, once broken at scale, never fully returns. Freedom, once demonstrated to be dangerous, disappears permanently. Systems, once proven vulnerable, transform into something unrecognizably restrictive. The individual walks away. Society adapts by becoming more constrained. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that these 10 examples represent only the tip of an enormous iceberg. Across every industry, every institution, and every aspect of daily life, similar stories have played out countless times. Someone pushed too far. Someone exploited too much. Someone demonstrated why nice things can't exist. The result is a world shaped not by collective wisdom or democratic choice, but by the worst decisions of its most irresponsible members. These aren't just historical curiosities or amusing anecdotes. They're the invisible architecture of modern existence. The hidden reasons why simple activities require complex procedures and why freedoms we should enjoy have been permanently revoked. Every time you encounter a rule that seems excessive or a restriction that feels unnecessary, you're likely experiencing the lasting legacy of someone who proved why that rule had to exist. The ultimate lesson isn't about individual responsibility or institutional failure. It's about the irreversible nature of broken trust at civilizational scale. Once someone demonstrates that a particular freedom can have catastrophic consequences, that freedom vanishes forever. regardless of how many people would use it responsibly. The bad actor disappears into history. The restriction becomes eternal, woven into the fabric of how society operates, long after everyone forgets why it was necessary in the first place. Human progress isn't just about innovation and discovery. It's about the gradual accumulation of restrictions created by people who couldn't control themselves when control was required. Each generation inherits not just the achievements of the past, but also its failures, crystallized into permanent limitations on what future generations can experience or attempt. The world becomes incrementally smaller, incrementally more restricted, one catastrophic decision at a time.